Great. So, hi, I'll kick it off. So I'm Daniel Kraft. I'm a med-peds trained hematologist, oncologist, but also have interesting purview chairing medicine at something called Singularity University, where we look at the convergence of technologies and how those impact everything from education to environment to healthcare. And I think sort of the theme of this panel is interesting in a sense, because now whether you're a consumer, a patient, a clinician, a payer, we're going to have a whole slew of new digital health technologies, connected health, mobile. The trick is what's going to be useful for you, what's going to be actionable as we move forward. So we're going to hopefully dive into how do we understand not just what the patient wants, but what they really need. And I'll just, before we go into the questions and hear from the panel, just a couple framing thoughts. You know, we have an explosion of sometimes commoditized devices on our wrist. The challenge then becomes, as clinicians, like myself, how do we connect the dots and make that useful, move from quantified self to quantified health? And just one small story that shows how this is starting to open up. I went to finally see my primary care doc at Stanford, Topher Sharp, and I found out that through my mobile app I could connect my Apple Health, and a week later he emailed me saying, your steps, your sleep, and your blood pressure look great. I had no idea that the device was connecting to my EMR, but that feedback loop's starting to happen and hopefully move us from our intermittent reactive model to continuous and proactive, which I first learned from Stan Shaw, my chief resident at Mass General. So it's an interesting era, and I think we're going to have an interesting conversation.
I'm working out of London, and like Daniel, I'm looking at the convergence of all these technologies, but what it means from a consumer's perspective. And I want to give you a quick soundbite in terms of, it'll be interesting to hear the panelists' thoughts about this as well. The Amazon Echo, that I've been doing a lot of research into this internet-connected speaker, and how I'm reading stories about how people, primarily in the US, have been using it as a health device in terms of they've got early onset Alzheimer's, they're using it to understand what's happening, where the news, etc., play a game, and then even control their smart homes. And so what does it mean when we shift towards a world where it's patients, where consumers can use these tools available off the shelf to become innovators for themselves without having to wait for the system to deliver something new?
So let me give you a couple thoughts from a regulatory perspective and where I sit in the agency. I've seen this convergence. We talked about it all morning about how the consumer technology is entering the patient world, and the patient sort of trying to sort of be non-patients and trying to see how they can engage in their health so before they're defined as patient and so on. But I see other couple of things happening as well, and that's very sort of focus of where FDA sort of plays a role. And I see a business sort of, from a business angle, those convergences happening as well. Now, what used to be sold as a medical device company or a one entity is sort of being disrupted by consumers sort of doing stuff on their own, and the commercialization is sort of changing as well. And then we just heard about how research is also being disrupted. And if you think about that for a second, and where FDA plays a role is knowing and having sort of a sound evidence before it actually reaches patient and before it becomes value added to patients. So you notice I'm changing the world from words from actually safety and effectiveness to actually value added. I think that's what people are going towards, and value added is another word I would say for effectiveness. And then safety. Safety is another dimension that's completely changing everybody's sort of perspective. The tolerance that we've been having until now, and we talked about it yesterday a little bit about how people are sort of ready to accept some of the risk, and how people are sort of ready to sort of experiment a little bit. And you may have heard the story about the N of 1 studies that's going on in certain in diabetes world. So bringing it all together, one of the things that I think about is what should that future look like, and where FDA has a role to not only sort of be the check in terms of what the product does to what's said about the product, but also how can we promote that. So we are thinking about at FDA and under digital health is how can we think about it in the future? How can we allow some of these things to sort of happen in a more free way that our processes are aligned, and how technology sort of are evolving, how technologies are introduced to the life cycles of this technology being introduced, and also globally. So we'll talk a little bit more as we go into the questions, but that's how I'm thinking about is aligning regulatory processes not to the laws, but actually allowing regulatory process to do what's value to patients and how it can be aligned with how technology is introduced and how do we align to sort of how globally, because these technologies are global.
Thanks. That's great. So I'm Mike Krupnick from Miami Health, and I started to think a little bit about, the topic of this presentation is who, what is the market and who is the customer, and in my mind, the market today is really iTunes and Amazon and Google Play and everything that's consumer driven and consumer available, and the customer clearly in my mind is the patient, and so I guess 3 years ago we started to think about this market. And we said, oh, there's 165 apps, more than 165 apps today, thousands of devices, wearables, sensors, millions of pieces of educational content. How do patients find the right thing for them, and how do doctors find the right thing to them? And how do we get doctors or healthcare providers as part of this equation? A lot of patients are going today to iTunes, and they'll do a search for diabetes or congestive heart failure or whatever they're searching for, and they're finding apps that are popular but aren't necessarily going to have an outcome associated with it. So we started to look at this marketplace and started to sort through it. And essentially what we're trying to do is we're trying to help find the right app, the right device, the right piece of content at the right time for the right patient. In order to do that, there's a couple things that are required. The first is transparency. So the market is essentially a marketplace. It has a lot of marketing literature, pretty pictures, a nice written description, but that doesn't speak to the literature, that doesn't speak to a lot of things. So we wanted to think about more broadly, what was a mobile health label look like? And so we created a concept called mHealth Labels, which basically allows you to look at any app consistently as a physician. And obviously, one of the things we need to do is match those things to the right patients. We need to have a formal way of distributing it and tracking how it's distributed, because we have no visibility to what's downloaded from the store directly. And we have no ability to kind of prescribe A versus prescribe B and look at the outcomes of to do a formal study, measuring it and obviously feeding that back into the system. So essentially, when we started to think about how we evaluate the value of an app for physicians, we looked at 6 main metrics. You already have the iTunes or the Google Play kind of patient-focused score, rating 0 to 5 stars. And that is one component, but we want to know also what do physicians think. We wanted to look at the functionality of the application. We wanted to look at endorsements, whether it be government endorsements or professional societies or provider institutions. We wanted to look at the developers themselves. A great app is updated every 2 weeks. Apps that haven't been updated in years is maybe not so great. We also really wanted to look closely at the clinical evidence, and we wanted to correlate those studies, and not just randomized controlled trials, but any sort of peer-reviewed literature that exists, even small samples. And obviously, each one of those things have different value. So that's the kind of the 6 lenses in which we took, and we built this kind of solution to kind of pull everything in. We have teams that review them constantly, and we make them available through our catalog. Ultimately, we think health institutions should create and manage mobile health formularies, and they should ultimately decide what they're comfortable with giving to their patients. Then we formally prescribe it, and then we can assess the outcomes. And this is AppScript that we created. Last but not least, this is an old slide that one of my former boss, Matt Tyndall, I think created. I think he might have spoken here once before, but essentially, the way I think we look at this is that there's this new modality of diagnosing and treating disease called digital therapeutics, mobile health, whatever you want to call it. And we sort of see this new modality formalizing, becoming a real thing. A couple years ago, it wasn't so much a real thing, but now it's becoming a real thing. There's established regulatory, standards. There's technologies really coming along. And I think this is what the future, we hope, looks like, is this becomes a real thing and we can somehow play in this environment. So thank you.
Cool. Does this actually change the slides?
Okay. Yeah.
I'm Michelle Longmire, and thank you so much for the center for having us here today. I'm with Medable, and we are a cloud platform for digital health innovators to build HIPAA-compliant, secure, and scalable applications with analytics. So our perspective on it is really as an enabler of innovation. My company is based in Palo Alto, and we really started out enabling technology for what we saw is the access point that Michael mentioned, which is the App Store, right? I think when you think about healthcare, access is a core part of our mission to deliver better healthcare. It's something that Dr. Saxon and our company are very vigilantly pursuing with the virtual care clinic. But mobile as an access point, potentially through like the Apple App Store, is a really powerful thing. And I think that that's something that, we remain very focused on as a company. So in enabling innovation on mobile and web, we just see a huge number of barriers, right? From HIPAA compliance to understanding how to create an application that will scale to enabling interoperability, right? At the end of the day, what we really feel at Medable is that it comes down to patient-generated data and enabling that to have the proper conduits to really transform healthcare. So, you can imagine that a simple question like, can you breathe easier today than yesterday in a heart failure patient, paired with a Bluetooth connected scale that would show a weight. Simple information like that is actually the starting point, in our opinion, for personalized healthcare and personalized medicine. But it's enabling that to happen over, very frequent intervals of time with an accuracy and a data flow that you can do at scale. So what we're really excited about is this new
really know
initiative
about health and disease, our insights are so limited. For even the most common conditions, our understanding has been informed by a small fraction of people ever affected. The reach of traditional research is limited to the walls of hospitals and clinics, and the scope to the immediate geographic area. But here's the thing: people inhabit all corners of the earth, in sickness and in health, and every patient, every person, every population deserves to be understood. So what would you study if you could connect directly with populations and patients anywhere on the earth, any time of the day? And not just 5, 10, or even hundreds of patients, but thousands and even millions.
I would combine data from unique biosensors in people's natural environments to catch cancer early.
I'd study the transition from health to illness, why people get certain things, and how that relates to where they live and what they do.
I'm Michelle Longmire, CEO and co-founder of Medable. I would study systemic sclerosis, and I would use a mobile application to gather rich longitudinal patient data that we could use to curate the epigenome and gain a deeper understanding of this disease. Medable is unlocking the potential of mobile to help us understand health and disease and real people everywhere, day in and day out. And it begins with you. Your study, your expertise, your idea.
So that's kind of a direction that our company is now going, coming back to what does the market really need? And what we feel is that we really need to enable innovation at scale. And so our consumers, from our perspective, are patients, they are physicians, they are researchers. They're really anyone who has an innovation that they feel can impact healthcare. And so our company, started out as a back-end as a service for developers. And we found that in evangelizing and enabling developers is meaningful and important, but really it comes down to enabling the health experts and the innovators directly. So we're really excited about a new product that we're launching next week in partnership or with really big companies in the space on mobile to enable health innovators to build the applications that will impact and collect patient-generated data directly. And from a market perspective, to enable innovators without barrier to build an app in an hour, define what sort of patient data this will collect, and then to collect that at scale and be able to leverage that data, I think will really transform the industry. Now, back to the point of the FDA, once you have this data and you apply disease prediction frameworks, now you can push information back to patients, and how will that interface with safety and regulatory concerns? I think that we'll very quickly be facing a new era of healthcare that will force and require us to answer some of the technical challenges and safety challenges around that.
Greetings. Hi, I'm Stuart Carton, and I have a design firm that's located here in Los Angeles, made up of about 30 people. We're research strategists, we're design researchers, we're industrial designers, we're mechanical engineers, user experience, UI, and we're primarily focused on the healthcare space, med tech. Clients are coming to us to make sure they understand people, and understand people in the broadest way and the most holistic way. You heard Dr. Yee mention that was one of his cautions. Most technology is awesome, but if it isn't actually used by people and have a desirability by them, it goes to waste. So I've had the fortunate experience of being here over the last 4 or 5 years and talking about the future and where I think it's going. And my vision of that hasn't really changed. In fact, it's being reinforced in many ways. So the core tenets of what I think, and let me just say that in terms of framing up the future, the way I like to think about it is, a few years back, people talked about digital banking and what digital banking was going to be, and then it just became banking. That's how we did it. And I believe that's the future of digital health, that it won't be about digital health, it'll be about how we actually get health care. And those tenets of being able to have powerful solutions, ubiquitous, that go throughout our lives, throughout our life stages, from when kids are born to when they get old and get sick, that things are intuitive, and probably the most important core tenet is it has to be desirable. It has to bring value to people, and it has to connect with people on an emotional level. And so what I'm seeing for the future is that eventually we'll have full consumer and clinician engagement. It won't be a us versus them, or how it's being paid, or who's covering it. We'll see seamless AI, where we're going to be able to tap into that big data and bring it back to us in a really amazing way with the right information. And Maneesh, to your point, I believe the future will be all about audio. It will be fed to you through your ears. It will be fed to you through voice and conversational. There's so many things that will actually, I think, happen in less than 10 years. Companies like Doppler, Bragi, and Alexa and Siri, all of these things are coming to the point where this is going to be the way we're going to want to interface with the world. And then I have shift to home, and that's probably because we're very involved right now with companies that are trying to figure out how to take connectivity and sensors and bring them into the home to actually allow people to sort of address their wellness and healthcare. But it's really shift to life throughout our day, throughout wherever we go. And so I'm even more excited about where I see the future based on the things that have been developing. So I'm happy to be here today.
Great. So I've got the first question for the panelists, and it's with relation to a report that I read recently that was published in the UK by PlexTech. And they talk about that the connected home in 4 years' time in England will replace some healthcare services, right? That is a really big, strong vision. Just in, you put up 2027, they're talking about 4 years' time, this will happen in England. Now, I'm thinking from the perspective of each of your vantage points and your specialist, your expertise, think of all the moving parts involved in making a connected home. Think about the fact that, even if you're capturing through voice, somebody saying in my own words, these are my side effects, right, in relation to a drug I'm supposed to take. In terms of how seamless the design, for example, the back end, how those different organizations work together to provide that seamless experience. I mean, it's just staggering for me to think how that actually works, in terms of those moving parts. So my question is, if this is this bold vision for the future, just 4 years away, how do you see, different aspects of the market being supported with this home becoming a health device?
I'll be happy to take that one. So at the last South by Southwest, I hosted a panel called Home Sweet Home, the Health Hub of the Future. And I had on the panel Dr. David Rue, who's from Samsung, Chief Medical Officer. I had a geriatrician, and I had an architect. And I believe that's where we're going to head. We will have this built into the home, and it will become part of it as we get architects and interior designers into understanding that they can actually affect these different experiences for people. And then you have the bathroom is where we do our health. It's where we do first aid. It's where we can measure things. And many of the companies that own the bathroom are taking it seriously and looking at what it means to connect their devices to provide that better experience.
Will our homes need to be regulated by the FDA because they're collecting all this health information everywhere?
So it's not about collecting the information, right? So from FDA's perspective, I think I see the vision where completely agreeing with my colleague over here that it's going to be so ubiquitous at a time where you will not even realize that you're collecting the information. And when you start doing the next level of analysis on top of it, I think that's where it becomes more important. It's not about like collecting, how many steps you walked or, how many cups of water you drank. That is all feeding into something that's going to tell you what's going to happen to you. And I think the promise in my mind, and maybe it's not 5 years away, but I'm hoping it's near, is we will be able to detect things so early that our interventions will be so small that will drive ultimately how we look at healthcare in general. So keeping that in perspective, so that's how I think about regulations and thinking about the next level up, where it becomes sort of the next level analytics sort of we should think about and care about, and to be accurate, right?
Yeah. Go for it. Yeah, I think that's right. I think, as the trend continues towards, what's been called zero UI, which is essentially there's no user interface. Essentially, there's no app that you have to touch. It's just sort of seamless to you. As sensors get smaller, you step on your scale, and magically it goes somewhere. You have no idea where, but it goes somewhere. And I think that's a good trend. I think this technology needs to be sort of seamless for it to really get wide adoption outside of these smaller type studies. I look at digital health in general as kind of a method of triage of patients, and I think that we'd like to have doctors at patients' homes all the time, but that would be very expensive to do. But there are certain services that can be delivered, maybe lower risk services that can be delivered in the home that can maybe prevent somebody from having to come to the hospital. So I think that, those are the opportunities we need to kind of sort of look at, is how can we make these things seamless, and how can we how can we triage healthcare leveraging technology. We have to think of technology. It was mentioned before, and I agree wholeheartedly, it's a tool in the belt of the healthcare professionals. And it's one of many tools. It's not the panacea, be all end all. It's one of many tools, including diet and nutrition and drugs and traditional devices and the traditional healthcare system, but it just supplements it and makes it more efficient and hopefully better.
Yeah, I think 4 years is a very short time frame, but I do think in the big picture, what will be very interesting is when we really see a blur between early detection and prevention, because at the end of the day, it's actually very much the same thing. Right now, we all have genetic mutations. We're all cancer carriers, but our immune systems and our bodies fight those processes, so they're never clinically relevant. So, as the home becomes connected, and say you have a toilet that can tell you have X, Y, or Z, those now are early detection systems which actually become preventative measures. But I think what it really comes down to when something goes from detection to prevention, and even with a connected home and potentially connected scales, or how then do you create the behavior modifications to really have an impact in a patient's life? Because that mirror can tell me, hey, you're 5 pounds fatter, or you ate that piece of cake, and here's what you're gonna look like in a year. But actually modifying people's behavior is really challenging. So whether we know you have 1 cell of cancer or 10 cells of cancer, if you eat a piece of chocolate cake and now you're gonna have heart disease, it really comes down to behavior modification, and I think that's where we're in dire need of true innovation.
So to that point, we're now in this, exponential age of, lots of options for wearables and apps, from the connected home to the connected phone. A clinician doesn't want to be overwhelmed with data, an individual doesn't. And back to this behavior change point, a lot of the apps and services that are out there are sort of still one size fits all. The user interface is maybe with the mindset of a Bay Area person who's wearing Google Glass and has an iWatch. How do we blend both the regulatory pieces, the design, all these elements, so that when I'm trying to do behavior change, it knows that I'm an ENTP on the Myers-Briggs, or at the carrots and sticks. When you look in the mirror in the morning, your digital mirror, it's going to be showing you future you when you're keep having that donut for breakfast. So I think there's an interesting opportunity there, but it blends all the challenges here to bring to what the consumer needs to tune it. Precision medicine moves to precision digital health intervention.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And that's really interesting point is, really understanding on an individual level what it is that makes someone tick. And I think that's a very fascinating concept when you think about personalized medicine, really personalizing the behavior change component, because everyone has different drivers, whether it's your children or the way you look. In dermatology, I can tell you, I'm a dermatologist, people are very motivated to spend a lot of money and take dramatic interventions to look better. And if you could tie those sort of methods, on those individual bases to those internal health processes. But yeah, to your point, that's a really interesting idea, is curating it in an individual way.
Yeah, I mean, I would say I would agree. I think, we definitely need to get to a level of personalization, but to get to that level of personalization, we have to look at other markets and how they've kind of adopted mobile. And really, they're very much analytics driven, right? And they're also, really focused on understanding their users, but responding to it like in near real time. So I mentioned before, these companies that are putting out apps every 2 weeks, that's kind of a crazy concept to think about in the healthcare world. A new version of the app is put out every 2 weeks. How do we regulate that? I think we need to kind of think about how do we monitor that, because we need to allow the market to continue to iterate and get to those, outcomes. Do A/B testing towards an outcome.
Yeah, this is exactly what I meant by aligning the regulatory paradigm. So we are looking at a new paradigm, and we need to come up with a new paradigm where we are expecting the app to be updated or the technology to be updated every 2 weeks, maybe even continuously. But then at some point, we have to sort of figure out where that threshold is, and it can be all the time, or it cannot be like never. So there's a happy medium in between. At the same time, I think what you hit upon, the post-market part or like real-world use part, I think that's a critical component. If you take the iterations part, and then you take the real-world use part, and then you start talking about patient preference, and you start thinking about what does the patient prefer at the end of the day, and that's what will lead us to personalization that sort of we all would seek for. And it means everything, right? So it means the genome, it means the coffee that you had this morning, it means like who did you talk to and what kind of meeting you went to, and you bring it all together, and then you personalize what drives people to the next level of care. I think that's really what we should, that I see going towards.
So I want to talk just about patient and public involvement. So we talk about patient engagement in terms of making an app or a device to get a patient to do something or not do something. But actually, when it comes to building these new products and services, how many organizations are actually saying, not just a focus group and saying what the consumers want, but actually saying from day one, we're going to involve you in the whole process of bringing this new app to market. Now, I was at Google, I was at DeepMind Health's first public and patient engagement event last week in London. And this is quite interesting because even though they were saying we want to design products that you want in the NHS, so please tell us what you want, most of the questions from the audience were, you're owned by Google, what does Google want to do with my medical records? Can we have some transparency? So I think what the real concern for a lot of people is still about, we want to feel reassured, we want to feel involved, we want to play a part in this. I mean, what are your thoughts in terms of successful patient and public involvement in digital health?
So my perspective on that is, it was brought up earlier, Uber, the perfect example, right, where, taxis were in the center of it, then all of a sudden they put people in the center and they said, what do people really want? And the experience was so good that most people didn't care about that they're giving up their locations and where they're going. And I don't think we've seen that tipping point in the healthcare, medical, wellness space where you say, that experience is so frickin' awesome that I will negotiate in my mind whether the privacy issues or the things are actually more important. And that's the place that I think we need to work towards, is really understanding how to connect with people emotionally, provide them the most amazing experiences, and then I believe the privacy piece.
So that's also about these organizations really understanding how these products and services make these consumers feel at the end of the day.
I mean, typically what we see is people have technology and they're just trying to jam it into people's lives. They're not understanding that, people are people. They don't want complication. They want simplicity. They don't want to have to change behavior. They don't want to take on new habits or ceremonies. They've just figured it out. So blending with those and figuring out how to integrate them seamlessly or into their lives is really the way that technology is typically had the best adoption.
Sorry.
On the bathroom concept, because we've talked a lot about it, and I think if we, from birth to old, or from young to old age, all our habits and ceremonies and health are in the bathroom. Bathroom's private. I think a lot about like the pregnancy test at home. Mm-hmm. And if you had if you were able to screen for colon cancer, urinary problems, skin cancer, diabetes, all these by connected devices in the bathroom and privacy, do you think that would be behavioral change? People seem to want to know their diagnosis, not get it from a bad phone call that they dread, so they avoid even getting the screening because they're dreading the bad news, right?
Yeah.
Would behavior change if you could have the knowledge of your condition or your heightened risk for it within something as private as your bathroom over the course of your life?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, imagine if the shower head could tell you that mole got a little bigger and maybe you should be contacting your doctor, and do it seamlessly. You don't have to go and schedule the appointment and show up. So, and then having the mirror as an interface to be able to see this and understand it, and be, even though people are concerned about their hair, they're concerned about their skin, they are concerned about other things as well, and we can bring that forward in a more, remind them, even though you say, like, here's what's going to happen if I eat my donuts, right? If you can bring that more face forward to them and literally help them understand the implications, it certainly should change behavior.
So I really like Nathan's cheese fries. And the reason that that's relevant is because in New York City now, if you look up at a menu in a lot of restaurants, the calorie count is listed on the menu. And I was in Coney Island a few years ago when this law passed, and I looked up at these cheese fries that I've eaten all through my youth, and I thought, wow, that's like 100% of my daily allowance. I gotta at least get the small cheese fry. So I think that real time
Right.
that real time data it can really have an effect on decisions.
So what I think this heads, if we synthesize all this, is we don't want to be logging in different things, having different things ping us. We almost want a bit of that GPS for healthcare. Like, you don't think about sharing your data when you drive and you get the data back from Google Maps. We all become sort of data donors, but we get the traffic. We can reroute ourselves. And that's happened pretty quickly. You wouldn't imagine going back to paper maps. And I think I did the keynote here 5 or 6 years ago, how much has happened just in the last 5 or 6 years. So in the last few minutes, we challenged the panel to think out a couple of years from now, exponentially, I just got the 7, what's the 10 going to be able to do? How's that going to enable health? Where will AI be? Robotics, drones, 3D printing. Are we going to deliver our drugs by drones before you even know you need them? Maybe I'll start with Bakul on the regulatory side. How can those of us here not say what can the FDA do to help us, but how can we help you live in that realm and trigger that kind of interface?
And before he answers, one thing just to add on that is that there was a report from Ericsson Labs earlier this year where they asked consumers around the world. 50% of these consumers in urban cities around the world believe that within 5 years, smartphones will be dead, they'll be gone. Right, so just to add that as a challenge as well.
So, great question, Daniel. I'm actually really excited that you asked that question, and I really plead every one of you to sort of help FDA be a partner in this journey. I think not only that we need to sort of grow with the technology, but also we also need to be creative, and it can be, the law says that, I think it needs to be how we can adapt and how sort of we should look at it from a, how the product behaves in real world. How do we collect that data? How we synthesize the data? How does research happen? At the same time, maybe there are other models we can think about that are akin in other industry, potentially looking at front-loading, knowing who the product maker is and knowing their capabilities, and then shrinking down and sort of the submission process and the review process. That's one option. Or how about an option where we allow technologies at a lower level where they're just sort of investigating, and then help sort of learn in field what happens in real life in the wild, and then sort of go from there on a stepwise basis. So we all sort of learn, and not only sort of build evidence, but also sort of build evidence and assurance as a community. I think if we can do that, I think that would be very useful. So that's a very high-level concept. I see a bunch of people nod their heads, but I don't have solutions for that. So how should we think about that? How can we leverage the excitement and the analysis that's happening in everybody's sort of little domains, and how do you bring that together nationally as a country so we can actually forward this technology now as opposed to 25 years from now?
Brief aside on that. So I'm going to be lucky to be at the FDA on Monday trying to tell the FDA where the puck is going. So I'm crowdsourcing, what should I tell the FDA? And then, so come find me. And Bakul and Jeff Shuren are coming to Exponential Medicine 2 weeks later. And we want to figure out ways, again, to enable the regulators to think about what's the future of regulatory science. And all of us who can build that community together will speed a better future.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a lot of hype out there, and then I think there's reality. And I think that there's a lot of new technologies kind of coming to the space, but the things that actually have long-lasting change is not only the ones that get through a pilot and prove that they are, have value, but the ones that actually are able to create behavior change, not behavior change, but change management within an organization, a traditional organization. And so these things are really just going to take time, and I think that's okay, to be honest. I know that's kind of like the opposite of, we're all talking about the future here, but I think it's okay that it will take time because it should be hard because there is risk associated with it. And the things that really do make it through this kind of gauntlet will have really, really lasting effects.
So in 10 years, what do I think will be cool? I think that what will be really cool is you're just not going to care that your, EKG is at Kaiser and your other data point from some lab 20 years ago is at Stanford, because it's not going to matter, because electronic medical records will not be a relevant source of health data in the way that your patient-generated data, your personal health-generated data, is relevant to understanding your actual health. And I think that that's a super important transformation to, one, actually provide the post-marketing data around the safety, because ultimately it's your data and that will be understood on an individual basis to understand if something is safe for you, and you will receive that information directly. And I think that is also the framework for personalized medicine, because it is when it's your data at scale, it's not about it being siloed, and it's generated, that you have access to from your mobile device, that one will understand the post-marketing safety, and two will be able to really leverage personalized medicine in a lot of what people are talking about. I think the coolest change I've seen in the last year, and what I think we will see in 1 year, 2 years out, I kind of came to this with this vision for doing algorithmic medicine, and first it was a back end as a service, but now, like our company in parallel with huge players in this space, are really looking at algorithm generation as a way to provide impactful patient management and disease management. And it's going to require FDA approval, and it needs to be addressed head on, but I think that's where we're going to see a scalability in medicine that we have never seen before in terms of access and opportunities to really improve in healthcare and move the needle.
Dear friends, that will have to be the last word. My apologies. We're running a little behind schedule, and we don't want to delay lunch, but please let's join together and thank these distinguished guests.